The desert didn't care about fairness. Elena had learned that the hard way, sitting on a splintered bench at the crossroads where three dirt roads met and went nowhere useful. The sun hammered down like it had a personal grudge, turning her black cotton dress into a furnace and her throat into sandpaper. Sweat traced lines through the dust on her face. Her bag sat beside her, canvas worn thin, containing everything she owned. 2 changes of clothes, a leather roll of tools, and a water canteen that was getting lighter by the hour. $23. That's what Marcus had left her with before he'd ridden off at dawn, his horse's hoofbeats fading into the hills like a broken promise. They'd been traveling together for 6 weeks, ever since Sacramento, and she'd believed his talk about starting fresh, finding work, building something. Turned out together had an expiration date, and it came the moment a better opportunity rolled through town. Specifically, a mining outfit heading north that wasn't hiring women. "Nothing personal, Elena," he'd said, not quite meeting her eyes. "They're paying real money. You understand." She'd understood perfectly. She understood she'd been an idiot. Now she sat at a crossroads that wasn't even a town, just a weathered signpost and a water pump that groaned when you worked the handle. North. Fort Collins, 47 miles. East. Redemption, 89 miles. West. Nothing listed, which probably meant it was worse than the other 2 options. She had enough money for a week's boarding house room, maybe 2 if she didn't eat much. Not enough for the kind of new start that required capital, connections, or the basic respect people gave to women who fit into acceptable boxes. She didn't fit. Never had. Her father had been a blacksmith in Philadelphia, the kind who built ironwork for mansions and took pride in teaching his daughter the trade. "Metal doesn't care if you're a man or woman," he'd told her, guiding her hands on the hammer. "It only cares if you know what you're doing." He'd died when she was 19, and she'd learned the hard truth. Metal might not care, but people sure as hell did. No one wanted a female blacksmith. They wanted wives, servants, seamstresses, roles that came with built-in supervision and social approval. Elena had tried. She'd worked in a tailor shop, hated every minute, quit after 3 months, tried domestic service, lasted 2 weeks before the household son decided her presence was an invitation. Tried a factory, got laid off when they needed to cut costs, and women were always the first to go. Eventually, she'd ended up doing odd jobs, repair work, anything that let her use her actual skills. But always on the margins, always temporary, always one step ahead of destitution. Then Marcus had shown up with his easy smile and talk of heading west where nobody cared about your past. She'd wanted to believe it badly enough that she'd ignored the warning signs. The way he never talked about specifics, the way his plans shifted depending on his audience, the way he treated her partnership as provisional. Idiot. A dust devil spun across the intersection, scattering grit against her skin. Elena closed her eyes and tried to think. Fort Collins was closer, but she'd heard it was mostly mining supply. Rough, expensive, competitive. Redemption was further, but supposedly more settled, though settled often meant rigid about who belongs. The Western Road was a gamble, and she'd done enough gambling for 1 year. She was reaching for her canteen when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of something breaking. Not just breaking, failing. Metal grinding against metal with a shriek that meant stress fractures and imminent collapse. Elena's head snapped up. A wagon was approaching from the north road, listing badly to one side, its left rear wheel wobbling with the kind of death rattle that said it had maybe 50 yards left before catastrophic failure. The driver was fighting it, hauling on the reins to keep the 2 horses steady while the wagon lurched and shuddered. As it got closer, Elena could see it was a freight wagon, not passenger, heavy built, loaded with crates strapped down under canvas, worth real money. The driver was a man in his 40s, weathered face tight with concentration, dressed well enough to indicate this wasn't some drifter's outfit. The wagon made it another 30 yards before the wheel gave up. The iron rims separated from the wooden spokes with a crack like a gunshot, the whole assembly collapsing inward. The wagon dropped hard on that corner, throwing the driver against the seat rail. The horses screamed and reared, and for a bad moment, Elena thought the whole thing would tip. But the driver knew his business. He hauled back on the reins, voice cutting through the chaos with commands that were sharp but not panicked. The horses settled, stamping and snorting but standing. The wagon listed at a 40-degree angle, its broken wheels splayed like a crushed spider. Then silence. Just the wind and the horses breathing hard. The driver sat for a moment, hands still tight on the reins, probably running through the same calculation Elena was already doing. He was stranded at a crossroads in the middle of nowhere with a loaded wagon. The nearest town was 47 miles away, and the afternoon heat was only going to get worse. Elena stood up. She didn't think about it, didn't weigh the options or consider the smart play. She just moved, picking up her bag and walking toward the wagon. The driver saw her coming and tensed. His hand went to something under the seat, probably a rifle. That's close enough. Elena stopped 10 feet out. Your axle's cracked. I noticed. You've got maybe an hour before the weight distribution shifts enough to break it completely. After that, you'll need a new axle, not just a new wheel. His eyes narrowed. You a wheelwright? Blacksmith's daughter, but I can tell when metal's about to fail. She gestured at the broken wheel. Mind if I look? He studied her for a long moment. Elena knew what he was seeing. A woman alone at a deserted crossroads, dusty and travel-worn, with a bag that suggested she was between destinations in the least voluntary way. Everything about the situation screamed potential problem, but she could also see him doing the math. He needed help. She was what was available. Slowly, he said. Elena approached the wagon, giving the nervous horses a wide berth. Up close, the damage was worse than she'd thought. The wheel hadn't just broken, it had failed structurally, probably from a combination of old wood and metal fatigue. The spokes had splintered where they met the hub, and the iron rim had bent when it collapsed. But that wasn't the critical problem. Elena crouched down to look at the axle mounting. There, a stress fracture running along the iron reinforcement bracket, still holding, but spreading. You need to unload the heavy items from this side, she said. Redistribute the weight toward the other rear corner. That'll take pressure off the bracket. I need to get to Redemption. You need to not have your wagon collapse in the middle of the road. Elena stood up, brushing dust off her hands. You've got tools? Some. Jack? Yes. Then we can probably jury-rig something that'll get you there. Won't be pretty, but it'll hold long enough if you go slow. The driver's expression shifted, still wary, but now calculating. We? Elena met his gaze straight on. I can fix this. Or you can sit here until someone else comes along who maybe can't, or maybe just decides a loaded wagon is easier to rob than help. Your choice. It wasn't a threat, just reality, and they both knew it. The driver was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Name's Calder Rourke. Elena Voss. You always make a habit of helping stranded travelers, Miss Voss? I make a habit of not watching things break when I can fix them. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe, or respect. Hard to tell. All right. What do you need? What followed was 2 hours of hard, methodical work. Elena directed Calder in moving crates to shift the wagon's weight distribution, then got underneath to examine the axle properly. The crack was bad, but not catastrophic, yet. They'd need to reinforce it and construct a temporary wheel assembly that could handle the load. Calder's tool situation was better than expected. A proper jack, basic smithing implements, spare wood, iron stock. Not a full traveling forge, but enough to work with. Elena heated an iron rod over a fire Calder built, shaped it to fit as a reinforcing brace along the cracked bracket. Her hands remembered the rhythm. Heat, hammer, check the angle, heat again. It was the first time in weeks she'd done real metal work, and something in her chest loosened. You know what you're doing, Calder said, watching her work. I told you, blacksmith's daughter. That's not what I mean. He was sitting on the wagon tongue, whittling a piece of wood into shape for one of the replacement spokes. You move like someone who's done this 1,000 times. Closer to 10,000. Elena plunged the hot iron into a bucket of water, steam hissing up. My father ran a shop in Philadelphia. I started helping when I was 8. And now you're here? It wasn't quite a question. Elena pulled the cooled brace out, checked its curve. Now I'm here. She could feel him wanting to ask more, but he didn't. Instead, he went back to carving spokes while Elena fitted the brace and began constructing a reinforced wheel assembly from spare parts and salvaged wood. It wouldn't be elegant. Half the spokes were different lengths. The rim was patched with iron strapping, and the whole thing looked like it had been built by someone who'd never seen a wheel before. But it would turn, and it would hold. Probably. The sun was lowering toward the horizon when they finally jacked the wagon up and fitted the improvised wheel. Elena's dress was soaked with sweat, her hands were filthy, and her shoulders ached from hammering. But when Calder tentatively released the jack and the wheel held, supporting the wagon's weight without collapsing, she felt a surge of satisfaction that was almost physical. "I'll be damned," Calder said quietly. Elena allowed herself a thin smile. "Told you." They tested it carefully, Calder leading the horses forward a few steps while Elena watched the wheel turn. It wobbled. It made concerning noises, but it held. "It'll get you to redemption if you don't push it," Elena said. "Keep the speed down, avoid ruts, and check the brace every few miles. If it starts to shift, stop immediately." Calder nodded slowly. Then he looked at her, and his expression had changed, still cautious, but something else underneath. "What were you planning to do before this?" Elena glanced back at the crossroads. Her bag still sat on the bench where she'd left it. "Figure out which road led somewhere that wasn't here." "You got work waiting?" "No." "Family?" "No." "Plans?" Elena almost laughed. "Not anymore." Calder was quiet for a moment, hands resting on the wagon tongue. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I run a ranch about 3 hours south of Redemption. Cattle, some horses, crops. It's remote. Closest neighbor is an hour away. Town is further. I've been trying to hire help for 6 months, but no one wants to stay. The work's hard. The isolation gets to people, and I can't pay what the big operations offer." Elena waited. She could feel where this was going, and she wasn't sure yet how she felt about it. "You can fix things," Calder continued. "Not just metal. I watched you work. You think through problems, you don't give up, and you don't get rattled." He met her eyes. "I need someone like that. You need work. Might be we can help each other. You don't know me. I know you could have walked past a broken wagon and didn't. I know you can work with your hands, think on your feet, and handle yourself." He paused. "And I know you're stuck at a crossroads with limited options. So am I, just for different reasons." It was blunt enough to be honest. Elena appreciated that. "What's the catch?" she asked. "Same catch everything has out here. It's a gamble. Maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. But at least it's a gamble with a roof and regular meals while you figure it out." Elena looked at him properly. Calder Rourke was maybe 45, with the kind of weathered face that came from decades of outdoor work. His hands were calloused, his clothes practical and worn. He didn't look like someone who made careless decisions, but he also didn't look like someone who had much room for error. "Why'd the other workers leave?" she asked. Honest answer? Because it's lonely as hell, the work doesn't stop, and I'm not the easiest person to work for. He said it flatly, without apology. "I expect things done right. I don't tolerate laziness or excuses. And the ranch is remote enough that if you're the kind of person who needs regular social contact, you'll go crazy inside a month. And if I am that kind of person, then you'll leave too, and we'll both have wasted each other's time." He shrugged. "But I'm guessing you're not, or you wouldn't be sitting alone at a crossroads in the middle of nowhere." "Fair point." "What exactly would I be doing?" Elena asked. "Everything that needs doing. Repair work mainly. Fences, equipment, buildings. We've got a forge that hasn't been properly used in 2 years. General ranch work when needed. Cooking's handled, but you'd be expected to pull your weight on everything else." "And the pay?" "Room, board, and $30 a month." It wasn't generous, but it wasn't insulting either. Not for room and board included. More than she'd make in most towns, where she'd have to pay for lodging separately. "How long a commitment?" she asked. "Trial period of 3 months. After that we reassess." Elena turned back toward the crossroads. The sun was getting lower, painting the desert in shades of amber and shadow. In an hour it would be dark, and she'd still be sitting on that bench trying to decide which road led to the least worst option. Fort Collins, Redemption, or disappear into the West. Or this, a ranch 3 hours from anywhere, working for a man she'd known for approximately 3 hours, in a situation that could go wrong in approximately 50 different ways. But she'd fixed that wagon, used her actual skills, made something work that had been broken, and for 2 hours she'd felt like herself. Not a problem to be managed, not a woman in the wrong role, just someone who knew how to do a job and did it. When was the last time anything else had offered her that? 3 months, Elena said, but I need to see the forge before I commit. And if the situation isn't what you're representing, I walk. No argument. Fair enough. And I'm not, she hesitated, then pushed through. I'm not looking for anything other than work, just so that's clear. Calder's expression didn't change. Noted. Same here. The directness of it was almost startling. No offense taken, no awkward deflection, just an acknowledgement that they both knew what needed saying. All right, Elena said. Then I guess I'm going to Redemption. They loaded her bag onto the wagon. It barely took up any space among the crates. Calder climbed up onto the driver's seat and offered Elena a hand up. She took it, settling beside him as he gathered the reins. One more thing, Calder said as the horses started forward. The ranch is called the Broken R. Been in my family for 20 years, though I'm the only one running it now. What happened to the others? Long story. He didn't elaborate and Elena didn't push. They pulled away from the crossroads slowly, the jury-rigged wheel groaning but holding. Elena looked back once, at the weathered signpost, the pump, the empty bench where she'd been sitting an hour ago. 3 roads leading nowhere she wanted to go. Now she was on a 4th road, and she had no idea where it led, but at least she was moving. The landscape shifted as they traveled, desert giving way to scrubland, then gradually to something that might almost qualify as grassland in a generous mood. The road got rougher, forcing Calder to navigate carefully around ruts and rocks. Every few miles he'd stop to check the reinforced wheel and bracket. Each time it held, though, the wobble got a little more pronounced. We're going to make it, Elena said after the 3rd check. Probably. Calder swung back up onto the seat. You always this optimistic? Only when I've done the math. He almost smiled at that. They didn't talk much as they traveled. Elena was fine with that. She'd learned the hard way that silence was often safer than trying to fill it. Besides, she was busy watching the landscape, cataloging what she saw. Sparse vegetation, rocky soil, some evidence of cattle grazing in the distance. Not prime ranch land, but not hopeless either. The sun had fully set by the time Redemption appeared. A scatter of lights in the distance, bigger than Elena had expected. The town had maybe 40 buildings, with a main street that looked relatively established. Not exactly civilized, but not exactly lawless frontier either. We'll stop at the wheelwright, Calder said. Get this fixed properly. There's a boarding house if you want to stay the night before heading out to the ranch. I'm fine to keep going. He glanced at her. It's another 3 hours in the dark. I've been sitting still for too long already. This time he definitely smiled, though it was gone quickly. All right then. The wheelwright shop was still open, barely. The owner took one look at Elena's improvised repair and let out a low whistle. Well, that's creative. It's functional, Elena corrected. That too. He crouched down to examine it more closely. Who did the metal work? I did. The wheelwright looked up at her, then at Calder, then back at the wheel. Huh. You looking for work? She's got work, Calder said before Elena could answer. Can you fix this tonight? I'll pay extra. The wheelwright quoted a price that was absolutely robbery, but Calder paid it without haggling. While the man got to work, they walked the horses down to the livery and arranged for water and feed. You didn't have to pay that much, Elena said. I needed it done tonight. Calder handed over money to the livery keeper. And I needed him to remember I don't haggle over quality work. There was something in the way he said it, a weight that suggested history. Elena filed it away. They bought supplies at a general store that was closing up. Salt, flour, coffee, a few other basics. Calder handled it efficiently, like someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Elena noticed the store owner watching her with barely concealed curiosity, but Calder didn't explain, and she didn't volunteer anything. The wagon was ready in just under 2 hours, sporting a proper wheel and reinforced axle. The wheelwright had done good work. She'd give him that. Calder inspected it carefully, nodded satisfaction, and they loaded back up. Leaving Redemption felt strange, like passing through one world into another. The lights fell behind them, and suddenly there was just darkness, stars, and the sound of the wagon wheels on hard-packed earth. Elena could barely see the road ahead, but Calder seemed to know it by feel. You do this run often? She asked. Once a month for supplies, more if needed. He kept his eyes on the road. You'll learn the route if you stay. If I stay. Right. More silence. Elena found herself watching the stars. brighter out here than she'd ever seen them in Philadelphia or Sacramento or any of the towns in between. The air was cooling rapidly, and she pulled her shawl tighter. "Can I ask you something?" Calder said eventually. "Depends what it is." "You said blacksmith's daughter, but you also said Philadelphia. That's not exactly frontier territory." Elena considered how much to share, then figured, what the hell? If this was going to blow up, better to know now. "My father taught me the trade because he didn't have sons, and I was interested. He figured skill mattered more than convention." She watched the darkness slide past. "He was wrong, or at least that's not how the world saw it. After he died, I learned that being good at something doesn't matter if people won't hire you because you're the wrong gender. So you headed west. Eventually, after trying every other option first." She didn't elaborate on Marcus or the string of failures that had led her to him. "Figured maybe out here, where things were less established, there'd be more room for people who didn't fit the standard molds." "And?" "Still figuring that out." Calder was quiet for a moment. "The ranch isn't progressive, if that's what you're hoping for. It's just practical. I need work done. You can do it. That's the extent of the philosophy." "Good. Philosophy hasn't gotten me very far." He actually laughed at that, a short, rough sound, but genuine. "Fair enough." The hours passed. Elena dozed intermittently, jolting awake whenever the wagon hit a rough patch. Sometime past midnight, they turned off the main road onto what was barely a track. The land got rougher, more broken. "Almost there," Calder said. 15 minutes later, Elena saw lights ahead. Not a town, just a few buildings, lanterns glowing in windows. As they got closer, she could make out the shape of a house, barn, outbuildings. Corrals with horses moving in the darkness. The sound of cattle somewhere in the distance. The broken R. Calder pulled the wagon up to the barn and set the brake. For a moment, they both just sat there, the horses stamping and blowing. "Well," he said, "here we are." Elena climbed down, her legs stiff from the long ride. The ranch looked functional. Nothing fancy, but solid. Buildings that had been built to last, not impress. She could see even in the lamplight that things needed work. Fences that wanted mending, equipment that needed maintenance, the general evidence of a place being run by one person instead of a full crew. "Bunkhouse is there," Calder pointed. "Has 3 rooms. Pick whichever one looks best. Washhouse is behind it. Pump works, water's clean. Main house is where I am, but you won't need to go there much. Meals are in the cookhouse at sunrise, noon, and sunset. You miss them, you're on your own." "Who cooks?" "Mrs. Chen. She and her husband run the cookhouse and handle the gardens. They're the only other people here full-time." Elena nodded, taking it in. "The forge?" "I'll show you tomorrow. It's late." He was right. She was exhausted, grimy, and running on fumes. But she also knew that first impressions mattered, especially in uncertain situations. "Show me now," she said. "Just a quick look." Calder studied her face, then shrugged. "All right." He grabbed a lantern and led her across the yard to a low stone building set apart from the others. When he pushed open the door, Elena smelled it immediately. Cold forge, old metal, dust. The lantern light revealed a surprisingly well-equipped shop. A proper forge and bellows, good anvil, tool racks on the walls. But everything was covered in a fine layer of neglect. Elena walked in slowly, running her hand along the anvil's surface. Good iron, solid mounting. The tools were quality, some of them very old, probably passed down. The forge itself was sound, just needed cleaning out and firing up. "This," she said quietly, "is a real workshop. It was my grandfather's, then my father's." Calder's voice was neutral, but something underneath wasn't. "Neither of them much wanted me learning it, but I picked up enough to know what I was looking at when you fixed that wagon. And now it's been sitting unused for 2 years. I don't have time to run it, can't do everything." He shifted, uncomfortable with something. "My brother was supposed to, but that didn't work out." Elena heard the weight in that statement. Family complications. She knew those. "I can make this work," she said, looking around the space. "Get it back to functional. Would be a shame to waste a shop this good." Calder nodded slowly. Then he seemed to make a decision. 3 months, like we agreed. You do good work, prove you can handle the isolation and the load, We'll talk about making it permanent. But I'm not making promises I can't keep, and I expect the same from you. Understood. All right then. He handed her the lantern. Get some sleep. Tomorrow starts early. He left, and Elena stood alone in the forge workshop, lantern light casting shadows across tools that wanted using. She was bone-tired, filthy, and standing in the middle of a gamble that could collapse as badly as that wagon wheel. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something that wasn't quite hope, more like possibility. The space between where she'd been and where she might be able to go. She touched the anvil once more, feeling the cold solidity of it. Then she picked up the lantern and went to find the bunkhouse. Tomorrow would tell her what kind of mistake she'd made. But tonight, at least, she had a roof and a forge, and the faint, fragile sense that maybe, she'd chosen the right road after all. The rooster started screaming at what felt like 3 in the morning, but was probably closer to 5. Elena jerked awake in the narrow bunk, disoriented, her back protesting the thin mattress and her brain trying to remember where the hell she was. Then it came back. The ranch, the gamble, the forge that smelled like abandonment and possibility. She sat up, wincing. The bunkhouse room was spare, bed, small table, hooks on the wall, one window with faded curtains. Someone had left a basin and pitcher of water on the table. Elena splashed her face, changed into her other dress, and tried to look like someone who belonged here instead of someone who'd stumbled into the situation by accident. The cookhouse was easy to find. Just follow the smell of coffee and the sound of voices speaking rapid Cantonese. Elena pushed open the door to find a small, warm room with 2 long tables and a kitchen area where a woman in her 50s was pulling biscuits from an oven while a man about the same age worked at the stove. They both stopped and stared at her. "You're the new one," the woman said. Not a question. Her English carried a thick accent but was clear. "Elena Voss. Mrs. Chen, this is my husband." She gestured at the man, who nodded but didn't speak. "You eat?" "Please." Mrs. Chen loaded a plate with eggs, biscuits, and something that might have been hash. Elena sat at one of the tables and ate mechanically, trying not to shovel food despite being starving. The Chens worked around each other with the practiced efficiency of people who'd shared a kitchen for decades, communicating in gestures and occasional words Elena couldn't follow. Calder walked in halfway through her meal, looking like he'd already been up for hours. He nodded at Elena, poured himself coffee, sat across from her. "Sleep all right?" "Well enough." "Good. We've got fence line down on the east pasture. Cattle got through last night. That's first priority." He bit into a biscuit. "After that, I want you looking at the irrigation pump. It's been making noises." Elena nodded, filing it away. "Fence repair and mechanical diagnostics." "Fine. Mrs. Chen will show you where tools are kept. Anything you can't find, ask." He drained his coffee in 3 swallows and stood. "Meet me at the barn in 20 minutes." He left. Mrs. Chen brought Elena more coffee without being asked, which felt like either hospitality or assessment, possibly both. "Mr. Rourke, he is—" Mrs. Chen paused, searching for words. "He works very hard. Expects same from others." I gathered that. "Other workers, they complain, say he is too demanding, too cold." She shrugged. "But he is fair, pays on time, keeps his word. Not many do that." It was quite possibly the most information anyone had volunteered about Calder, and Elena tucked it away. Fair but demanding, cold but consistent. She could work with that. The fence line situation turned out to be worse than Calder had indicated. Not just down, destroyed. Something had hit it hard, probably cattle spooked by predators, and taken out a 30-foot section. Posts were snapped, wire was tangled into unusable scrap, and the whole thing needed rebuilding from scratch. "Coyotes," Calder said, surveying the damage. "Got close enough last night to scatter the herd. This is what happens." They worked in the rising heat, digging new post holes, setting cedar posts, stringing new wire. Calder worked with the kind of methodical intensity that didn't leave room for conversation, and Elena matched his pace. Her hands remembered this kind of labor, repetitive, physical, requiring more persistence than skill. 2 hours in, her dress was soaked with sweat, and her shoulders were screaming. Calder hadn't slowed down. "You need a break?" he asked, not looking up from the wire he was stretching. "No." Elena hammered another staple, securing the wire to the post. Her palms were developing blisters. All right. They kept going. By the time they finished, the sun was directly overhead, and Elena felt like she'd been beaten with hammers. But the fence was solid, tight, properly tensioned. Calder tested it twice, then nodded. Good work. It shouldn't have felt like a victory, but it did. The irrigation pump was located in a shed near the vegetable gardens. A complex mechanism of pipes, valves, and a gasoline engine that was supposed to draw water from an underground spring. When Calder started it up, Elena heard the problem immediately, a rhythmic knocking that suggested loose fittings or damaged bearings. When did it start? She asked. 3 days ago. Been getting worse. Elena crouched next to the pump, listening to the engine's rhythm, feeling the vibrations. There, a particular frequency that matched loose mounting bolts. She traced the pipe connections, found where the main output pipe was rattling against its bracket. Shut it down, she said. Calder killed the engine. Elena examined the mounting more closely. The bolts had worked loose, probably from sustained vibration, and the pipe was banging against the bracket with each pump cycle. Left alone, it would eventually crack the fitting or damage the pipe threads. I need tools, she said. Wrench set, thread sealant if you have it, and something to use as a spacer. Calder retrieved what she needed from the main workshop. Elena tightened the mounting bolts, added sealant to prevent future loosening, and fashioned a rubber spacer from an old gasket to dampen vibration. It took 45 minutes and left her hands covered in grease. When Calder started the pump again, it ran smooth. That's better, he said. Elena wiped her hands on a rag. It'll hold for now, but those mounts are worn. You'll want to replace the whole bracket assembly eventually. Can you fabricate one? Yes, if the forge is working. Something flickered across Calder's expression. Calculation, maybe, or reconsideration. We'll get it working. They ate lunch in the cookhouse. Cold chicken, bread, water. Elena was too tired to taste it. Calder outlined the afternoon's work. Checking the rest of the fence line, servicing the windmill, looking at a wagon wheel that was starting to show wear. It was a test. Elena knew it, seeing how much she could handle, how long before she complained or slowed down or asked for accommodation. So she didn't. She just kept working. By the time sunset arrived, Elena had inspected 2 miles of fence, climbed a windmill to grease the gears, and determined that the wagon wheel could go another month but would need replacing after that. Her body hurt in places she'd forgotten could hurt. Her dress was filthy. She had blisters on both hands and a sunburn on her neck, and she felt, strangely, better than she had in months. Dinner was beef stew and biscuits. Calder ate quickly and left without comment. Elena lingered, too exhausted to move immediately. Mrs. Chen brought her tea without asking. You did good today, the older woman said. I saw you working. No complaining. Didn't seem productive. Last man who worked here, he complained all the time. Morning too early, work too hard, food not good enough. Mrs. Chen snorted. He lasted 3 weeks. Elena sipped the tea. Some kind of herb blend that tasted medicinal but settled her stomach. How long have you been here? 15 years. When Mr. Rourke's father was still alive. Her expression went distant. Different then. More people, more money. Ranch was bigger operation. What changed? Mrs. Chen hesitated, clearly weighing how much to say. Family trouble? The father died, the older brother left. Mr. Rourke tries to keep it going alone, but she shrugged. Ranch needs 3 people minimum. He has been doing work of 3 people for 2 years, which explained the state of the place. Functional, but fraying at the edges, maintenance deferred, systems operating past their optimal lifespan. He needs help, Elena said. Yes, but he also needs people who stay. Not easy, living out here. Very isolated. Some people cannot handle it. Elena thought about the crossroads, the empty roads, the years of trying to find somewhere that would let her just exist and work. I can handle isolated. Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe you can. The next day started the same way. Rooster, coffee, Calder outlining work with the emotional investment of someone reading a supply list. But there was a difference. He took Elena to the forge. In daylight, the workshop looked both better and worse. Better because she could see the quality of the equipment. the thoughtful layout, the evidence of serious metalworking history. Worse, because she could also see how badly it had been neglected. The forge was full of old ash and debris. Tools were tarnished. The bellows leather was dry and cracking. "This needs a full restoration before it's usable," Elena said, running her hand along the bellows. "The leather here is shot. It'll tear if you try to work it hard. I can patch it temporarily, but you'll want to replace it eventually." Calder nodded. "Do what you need to do. I'll authorize supply purchases within reason." Define reason. Don't buy a new anvil. Do buy whatever consumables and parts are necessary to make the existing equipment functional. Fair enough. Elena started cataloging what she'd need. Leather for the bellows, coal for the forge, files to restore the tools, oil for the metalwork. It would take days just to get the shop cleaned and organized, and that was before attempting any actual smithing. "I'll need to work on this between other jobs," she said. "Can't restore a forge in a day." "Understood. Make it a secondary priority. Urgent repairs come first." So that became the pattern. Mornings were for ranch work, fixing fences, maintaining equipment, handling whatever crisis had developed overnight. Afternoons, if there was time, Elena worked in the forge, cleaning, organizing, slowly bringing the workshop back to life. It was exhausting. It was also the most purposeful she'd felt in years. 3 days in, Calder brought her a broken plow blade. "Can you reforge this?" Elena examined it. The blade had cracked along a stress line. Not catastrophic, but it would fail completely if used. Reforging would require heating the metal, drawing it out, and retempering the edge. Doable, but it would be her first real test of the forge. "Yes, but I'll need to fire up the forge properly, and the bellows leather is still questionable." "Make it work." She did. It took most of an afternoon and required nursing the patched bellows carefully, but Elena got the forge hot enough to work the steel. The familiar rhythm came back. Heat, hammer, check the color, heat again. The metal moved under her hands, the crack closing as she worked the steel, consolidating the grain structure. When she quenched the finished blade, the hiss of steam felt like vindication. Calder inspected it carefully, testing the edge, checking the straightness. Then he nodded. "Good work, better than it was originally." High praise coming from him. That night at dinner, Mrs. Chen was more talkative. "Mr. Chen says the plow blade looks very good. He worked metal in China before we came here. He knows quality." Mr. Chen, eating silently at the other end of the table, gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Elena felt something warm in her chest, not quite pride, but close. Recognition from people who knew the craft. The days blurred together. Fences, pumps, gates, hinges, a broken wagon axle, a fractured tool handle. Elena worked sunrise to sunset, her hands developing new calluses over old scars. The ranch slowly shifted from barely holding together to functional, one repair at a time. Calder remained distant but fair. He worked alongside her when needed, didn't ask her to do anything he wouldn't do himself, and paid attention when she explained technical problems. He wasn't warm, exactly, but he was consistent. She always knew where she stood, which was more than she could say for most people she'd worked with. 2 weeks in, Elena was in the forge working on new hinges for the barn door when she heard voices outside. Not the usual sounds of the ranch, these were unfamiliar and multiple. She set down her hammer and stepped outside. A wagon had pulled up to the main house. Fancy, not freight. A woman in her 30s was climbing down, dressed well enough to make Elena immediately conscious of her own filthy work clothes and ash-stained hands. Behind her, a man in a suit was helping with packages. Calder emerged from the barn, and his whole posture shifted. Not quite tension, but definitely alertness. "Margaret," he said, not welcoming, not hostile, neutral. "Calder." The woman's voice was cultured with the kind of precision that came from education and money. "I was passing through and thought I'd stop by. See how you're managing." "I'm managing fine." "So I see." Her gaze swept the ranch, lingering on the repaired fences, then shifting to Elena. "And you've hired help. How progressive of you." The tone was pleasant, but something underneath wasn't. Elena felt herself being assessed and categorized in about 3 seconds. Calder's jaw tightened fractionally. "Margaret Sutton, this is Elena Voss. She's handling repairs and forge work." How fascinating. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. I didn't realize you'd found someone willing to work out here. The last several didn't last long, as I recall. Miss Voss is managing. I'm sure she is. Margaret turned back to Calder. I actually came because I heard about your situation with the cattle contracts. The Hendersons are expanding their operation, you know. If you're struggling to meet quota, they might be interested in buying out your remaining stock. I'm not selling. Calder, be reasonable. You're trying to run a ranch that needs 3 people with only yourself and, she glanced at Elena dismissively, whatever help you can find. The Hendersons would give you a fair price, and you could move closer to town, find something more sustainable. I said I'm not selling. The conversation had a history Elena couldn't fully read, but she could feel the weight of it. This wasn't the first time Margaret had suggested this, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Well, Margaret's tone shifted to forced lightness. I suppose stubbornness runs in the family. I just hope you're not making the same mistakes your brother did. Calder's expression went completely flat. Was there anything else? No, I suppose not. Margaret climbed back into her wagon. Do think about it, though. The offer's generous, and these opportunities don't last forever. The wagon pulled away. Calder stood watching it go, his hands clenched at his sides. Elena waited, uncertain if she should say something or disappear back into the forge. She's not wrong, Calder said finally, voice tight. The ranch is barely viable with 1 person. You have me now. He turned to look at her, and something complicated crossed his face. For 3 months, maybe. Maybe longer, if it works out. And if it doesn't, I'm back where I started. He shook his head. Margaret's family owns half the valley. She's been trying to buy this place for years, says it's not sustainable, says I should cut my losses and sell. She's probably right. Elena thought about the forge, the repaired equipment, the fences that we're holding. The ranch seems functional to me. Functional isn't profitable. I'm meeting obligations, but not building anything. Every season I fall a little further behind, and eventually, he didn't finish. Eventually, what? Eventually, I'll have to admit she's right. There was defeat in his voice, buried but present. Elena recognized it. The exhaustion of fighting a losing battle, the temptation to just give up and accept the easier path. That woman, Elena said carefully. She looked at this place for maybe 30 seconds and decided it was failing. Looked at me the same way. Calder almost smiled. Yeah, Margaret's good at snap judgments. And she's usually right? Usually. He turned back toward the barn. But not always. Elena watched him walk away, then returned to the forge. But Margaret's visit had lodged something uncomfortable in her mind. She was temporary help on a struggling ranch in the middle of nowhere, working for a man who might have to sell within the year. And if he did, she'd be back at that crossroads, trying to figure out which road led somewhere that wasn't worse. She'd thought this was stability, but maybe it was just a slightly slower version of the same uncertainty she'd always lived with. The thought sat heavy in her chest as she worked the bellows, heating iron for hinges that might not matter in 6 months. That evening, Mrs. Chen brought tea to the forge, something she'd never done before. Elena looked up from the anvil, surprised. You look troubled, Mrs. Chen said. Just tired. Mrs. Chen set the tea down on the workbench. Mrs. Sutton's visit upset you. It wasn't a question. Elena set down her hammer. She upset Calder more than me. Yes, she reminds him of things he wants to forget. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment. You know the brother I mentioned, the one who left? Elena nodded. He was engaged to Margaret Sutton. Big plans. They would merge the properties, create a large operation. Very profitable. Mrs. Chen's voice was flat. But the brother, he had problems. Drinking, gambling, bad decisions. Eventually he left, broke the engagement, disappeared. Margaret blames Mr. Rourke for not controlling his brother, for not making the marriage happen. She wanted the land then. She wants it now. And Calder? He feels he failed. Failed his brother, failed his father's legacy, failed to keep the ranch strong. Mrs. Chen met Elena's eyes. This is why he works so hard, why he is so cold sometimes. He is trying to prove he can do it alone. But he can't. No, no one can. Mrs. Chen picked up a finished hinge, examining it. But maybe he can do it with right help, if that help stays. The implication was clear. Elena was being evaluated not just on her skills, but on her commitment, and Mrs. Chen, at least, was hoping she'd stay. "I don't make promises I can't keep," Elena said. "Good. Neither does he." Mrs. Chen set down the hinge. "But sometimes promises are not needed. Sometimes people just need to show up and do the work. Day after day. That is its own kind of promise." She left, taking the tea with her, leaving Elena alone with the forge and her thoughts. Show up and do the work, day after day. Elena could do that. Had been doing that. The question was whether it would be enough for Calder, for the ranch, for her own need to finally land somewhere that would let her stay. She banked the forge, cleaned her tools, and walked back to the bunkhouse under a sky full of stars. Tomorrow would start the same way: rooster, coffee, work that needed doing, and she'd do it because that's what she'd signed on for. But Margaret's words echoed. These opportunities don't last forever. Nothing did. Elena had learned that the hard way. The third week brought the first real crisis. One of the cattle came down sick, some kind of respiratory infection that spread fast. Calder spent 2 days working around the clock, isolating infected animals, treating them with what limited medicine he had, trying to prevent a full herd collapse. Elena helped where she could, though she knew nothing about cattle medicine. Mostly that meant handling everything else. The fence repairs that still needed doing, the equipment maintenance that couldn't wait, the 100 small tasks that kept the ranch functional. She worked 18-hour days, catching sleep in brief snatches, running on coffee and stubbornness. By the third day, she was moving on autopilot, her hands doing familiar work while her brain shut down everything non-essential. On the fourth day, the crisis broke. The infection stopped spreading. The sick cattle started recovering. Calder looked like he'd aged 5 years in a week, but the herd was intact. He found Elena in the forge, where she'd been repairing a gate hinge for the third time because she kept making small mistakes from exhaustion. "You should rest," he said. "So should you." "I will, after I finish the evening check." He leaned against the doorframe, and Elena noticed how much weight he'd lost. "You didn't have to keep working through all that." "What was I going to do? Sit around?" "Some people would have." Elena set down the hammer, too tired to continue. "I'm not some people." Calder studied her for a long moment. "No, you're not." He pushed off the doorframe. "Take tomorrow off. That's an order." "The west fence still needs—" "It can wait. You can't work yourself to collapse. That doesn't help anyone." It was the closest thing to concern he'd ever expressed. Elena found she didn't know how to respond. "All right," she said finally. "Tomorrow off." He nodded and left. Elena stared at the unfinished hinge, then at her blistered hands, then at nothing in particular. She was so tired she felt hollow. But underneath the exhaustion was something else, the bone-deep satisfaction of having been useful during a crisis, of having been needed and not found wanting. It had been a long time since she'd felt that. The next day she slept until noon, woke up disoriented, and spent the afternoon doing absolutely nothing productive. It felt strange, almost wrong, but her body desperately needed it. That evening she found Calder at the corral, checking on the recovered cattle. He looked marginally more human than he had the day before. "They look better," Elena said. "Yeah. We'll lose a few, but most will pull through." He rested his arms on the fence rail. Could have been a lot worse. But it wasn't. No. He was quiet for a moment. "You did good work this week. Kept everything running while I dealt with the herd. I don't know if I said that." "You didn't need to." "Still, it mattered." He glanced at her. "The 3-month trial period ends next week." Elena's stomach dropped. She'd lost track of time, hadn't realized how close they were to the end of the agreement. "Right. I'd like you to stay, permanently if you're willing. Same pay, same arrangement." He paused. "Unless you want to renegotiate." It took Elena a moment to process. She'd been so focused on proving herself, on just surviving day to day, that she hadn't let herself think about what came after. "I'll stay," she said. "You don't want to think about it?" "No. I'll stay." Something that might have been relief crossed Calder's face. "All right then. Good." They stood there in the fading light, watching the cattle graze, and Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not happiness, exactly. More like the absence of constant uncertainty. A foundation, maybe. Something to build on. "There's one thing," Calder said. Elena tensed. "What?" "People in town are going to talk. About you being here, about the arrangement. Margaret will probably make sure of it." He kept his eyes on the cattle. "Just so you know what you're signing up for. Let them talk. It might make things difficult when you go into redemption for supplies." "I've handled difficult before." Calder finally looked at her. "Yeah, I'm starting to realize that." They stayed there until full dark, not talking much, just existing in the same space. And for the first time since the crossroads, Elena let herself believe that maybe, possibly, she'd found something that could last. It wouldn't be easy. The ranch was still struggling, Margaret was still circling, and there were 1,000 ways this could fall apart. But for now, in this moment, it was enough. Tomorrow, the work would start again. The fences, the equipment, the endless maintenance that kept the ranch alive. And Elena would be there, hammer in hand, doing what she'd always done, fixing what was broken and building something that could hold. 2 months after Elena agreed to stay permanently, the trouble she'd been half expecting finally arrived, though not in the form she'd anticipated. It started with supplies. Calder had gone to Redemption for the monthly run, leaving Elena to handle the ranch. She'd spent the morning reshaping a broken harness buckle and was testing the repair when she heard hoofbeats approaching at speed. Not the steady rhythm of someone just passing through. This was purposeful. Elena set down the buckle and walked outside. A rider was coming up the road, pushing his horse harder than the heat warranted. As he got closer, she recognized him from town. Young, maybe 20, wearing a deputy's badge that looked too new to have much authority behind it. He pulled up short, the horse blowing hard. "You Elena Voss?" "Yes?" "There's been an accident in town. Mr. Rourke asked for you." Elena's stomach went cold. "What kind of accident?" "Wagon tipped loading supplies. He's pinned underneath." The deputy's face was pale. "Doc's with him, but it's bad. He keeps asking for you." She didn't waste time with questions. "How long ago?" 20 minutes. I rode straight here." Elena was already moving toward the barn. "Mrs. Chen," she shouted. "I need the fastest horse now!" Mrs. Chen appeared from the cookhouse, took one look at Elena's face and the deputy, and started running toward the stables. Within 3 minutes, Elena was mounted on a bay mare she'd only ridden once, following the deputy back toward Redemption at a pace that was probably stupid, but she didn't care. Her mind was racing through possibilities, none of them good. Wagon accidents were common and frequently fatal. People got crushed, bled out, went into shock. And Calder had asked for her specifically, which meant he was conscious enough to make requests, but hurt badly enough to need someone. The ride took 40 minutes that felt like 4 hours. By the time they reached Redemption's main street, Elena's hands were numb from gripping the reins, and her throat was raw from breathing hard in the dust. A crowd had gathered outside the general store. Elena dismounted while the horse was still moving, pushing through people who were muttering and staring. Someone tried to stop her. "Ma'am, you shouldn't," but she shoved past. The scene was worse than she'd imagined. The freight wagon had tipped while being loaded, spilling crates and trapping Calder underneath the bed. Someone had managed to get a jack under the wagon to lift it slightly, but not enough to pull him free. The town doctor, an older man with a blood-stained shirt, was crouched beside Calder, pressing bandages to his side. Calder's face was gray with pain and blood loss. But when he saw Elena, something in his expression shifted. "Took you long enough," he said, voice strained. Elena dropped to her knees beside him. "What happened?" "Load wasn't balanced. Shifted wrong. He tried to shift position and went rigid with pain. My leg's trapped. Can't get leverage to lift the wagon high enough." The doctor looked up at Elena. "Are you family?" "I work for him." "Well, he's been asking for you for the past half hour." The doctor's tone was sharp with stress. "His leg is crushed from mid-thigh down. We need to get him out before the damage gets worse, but every time we try to lift higher, the jack slips. We need a better brace system." Elena looked at the wagon, the jack placement, the angle of the trapped leg. Her brain shifted into the mode it always went when facing a mechanical problem: emotionless assessment, calculating loads, and leverage points. "The jack's positioned wrong," she said. "You're trying to lift the entire wagon weight when you only need to lift the corner, and you need a secondary support before you raise it more, or it'll tip the other direction." "Can you fix it?" Calder asked. His breathing was getting shallower. "Yes, but I need tools and wood for cribbing." A man in the crowd spoke up. "Wheelwright shop's got everything. I'll get it. Bring 2 jacks if he's got them. Also, mamin I got them, plus 4x4 lumber, at least 6 feet worth. And a pry bar." Elena was already measuring angles with her eyes. "Fast!" The man ran. Elena turned back to Calder. "This is going to hurt more before it gets better. Everything hurts already. Just get me out." The wheelwright's assistant came back in under 5 minutes with equipment. Elena worked quickly, ignoring the crowd that had pressed closer to watch. She repositioned the first jack to focus on the specific corner pinning Calder's leg, placed the second jack on the opposite side to prevent tipping, and built a cribbing structure from the lumber to support the wagon as she raised it incrementally. "When I lift, you pull him straight back," she told the doctor. "Don't twist, don't angle, straight." "I know how to move an injured man." "Then do it right." Elena's voice came out harsher than intended, but she didn't care. She pumped the first jack, watching the wagon rise a 1/4 inch. The cribbing held. She pumped again. Calder made a sound between his teeth, not quite a scream, but close. "Almost there," Elena said, though she had no idea if that was true. She just needed him conscious. She pumped the jack again, added a cribbing block, switched to the second jack to maintain balance. The wagon rose another 1/2 inch. Then another. "Now," Elena said. The doctor and 2 other men grabbed Calder and pulled. For a horrible moment, his leg caught on something, and Calder's scream was real and raw. Then he came free, and they dragged him clear of the wagon. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then she looked at Calder's leg, and her stomach turned. The damage was catastrophic, bone visible through torn flesh, the whole thing bent at an angle that wasn't anatomically possible. The doctor was already working, ripping away what was left of the pant leg, examining the wound with hands that were steadier than his face. "We need to get him to my office. Now." They improvised a stretcher from boards and moved Calder as carefully as possible. Elena followed, dimly aware that people were staring, whispering. She didn't care about any of it. She just kept her eyes on Calder's face, watching for signs he was slipping into shock. The doctor's office was small and smelled like carbolic acid. They laid Calder on a table, and the doctor immediately started cutting away more clothing, revealing the full extent of the injuries. Besides the leg, there were deep bruising across his ribs and a gash on his side that was bleeding steadily. "You need to wait outside," the doctor said to Elena. "No." Calder's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak but desperate. "She stays." The doctor looked like he wanted to argue, then saw Calder's expression and reconsidered. "Fine, but stay out of my way." What followed was 2 hours of brutal medical work. The doctor cleaned the wounds, set the broken bones as best he could, though he warned multiple times that the leg was damaged badly enough that Calder might never walk properly again, and stitched the deeper gashes. Calder endured it with his jaw clenched and eyes fixed on the ceiling, occasionally squeezing Elena's hand hard enough to hurt. Finally, the doctor stepped back, wiping blood from his hands. "That's all I can do for now. The leg might heal if infection doesn't set in, but it'll be months before he can put weight on it. Maybe never fully." He looked at Elena. "He can't be moved for at least a week. After that, he'll need care, constant care for weeks. Can you handle that?" Elena looked at Calder, who was barely conscious now, gray with pain and blood loss. "Yes. It won't be easy. Wound care, helping him move, managing pain, and there's a real chance he'll lose the leg anyway if infection takes hold." "I understand." The doctor nodded slowly. "All right. I'll check on him daily, but the rest is on you." He pulled a brown bottle from a cabinet. "Laudanum for pain. Don't give him too much or he'll stop breathing. I'll write down the doses." Elena took the bottle, tucked it carefully into her pocket. "What about getting him back to the ranch?" "Not for at least 7 days, probably 10. Moving him too soon could rupture the internal injuries." The doctor glanced at Calder, then lowered his voice. "You'll need somewhere to stay in town." The boarding house won't take you. The doctor's expression was uncomfortable. They're particular about who stays there. Woman traveling with an unmarried man who isn't family, you understand. Elena understood perfectly. The same social rules that had followed her everywhere, now catching up even in a crisis. Then what do you suggest? There's a room above the livery stable. It's not much, but the owner's practical about these things. I'll arrange it. It was better than nothing. Elena nodded. Thank you. The doctor left to make arrangements. Elena pulled a stool close to the table and sat down, still holding Calder's hand because he hadn't let go. His breathing was shallow but steady, his face slack with exhaustion and laudanum. She should have felt something, fear, maybe, or anger at the situation, but mostly she just felt tired and grimly determined to handle whatever came next. It's what she'd always done. The room above the livery was exactly what Elena expected. Bare walls, narrow bed, one window that didn't close properly. But it was private, and the livery owner, a taciturn man in his 60s, didn't ask questions. He just quoted a weekly rate and went back to his horses. Getting Calder there was its own ordeal. Even with help from the doctor and 2 townsmen, moving him from the office to the livery room took 20 minutes and left him white-faced and shaking. By the time they got him settled on the bed, Elena was fairly certain she'd aged 5 years. I'll be back tomorrow morning, the doctor said. You know where to find me if things get worse before then. What counts as worse? Fever over 102, increased bleeding, signs of delirium beyond normal pain response. He handed her a list. Change the bandages twice daily, keep the wounds clean, make sure he drinks water even if he doesn't want to. And for the love of heaven, don't let him try to stand. Elena took the list, committed it to memory. Understood. The doctor left. The townsman left. Suddenly, Elena was alone in a dingy room with an unconscious man whose life was now, apparently, her responsibility. She pulled the stool close to the bed and started doing what the doctor had instructed, checking bandages, monitoring breathing, making sure Calder was positioned so the injured leg had minimal pressure. Practical tasks with clear outcomes. She could handle that. Calder drifted in and out of consciousness for the rest of the day. When he was awake, he was in too much pain to talk much. When he was under, he made sounds that suggested his dreams weren't pleasant. Elena stayed close, adjusting bandages, offering water, administering laudanum according to the doctor's careful schedule. Night fell. The livery settled into quiet, punctuated by occasional horse sounds from below. Elena dozed in the chair, waking at every shift in Calder's breathing, every sound that might indicate complications. Somewhere around midnight, he woke fully, disoriented and trying to sit up. Don't move, Elena said, pressing his shoulder back. You'll tear the stitches. Calder blinked, focusing on her face. Where? Livery stable, Redemption. You've been out for about 8 hours. Memory came back. She could see it happening in his expression. The wagon, my leg. Broken badly. Doctor says you can't move for at least a week. Elena handed him water. Drink. He drank mechanically, then lay back with a sound of frustration. The ranch. Mrs. Chen and her husband can handle things for a week. The irrigation pump was making sounds again, and the north fence needed I'll handle it when we get back. Elena kept her voice firm. Right now you need to focus on not dying from infection or shock. Calder looked at her for a long moment. You stayed. Where else would I go? Most people wouldn't. Most people would see an injured employer as a good time to leave, not get trapped caring for them in a room above a livery stable. Elena thought about that. He wasn't wrong. She could have left, taken her month's wages and headed back to those 3 roads at the crossroads, tried her luck somewhere else. I'm not most people, she said finally. You pointed that out yourself. Something that might have been gratitude crossed his face, but pain washed it away quickly. Elena checked the schedule and gave him another dose of laudanum. Within 10 minutes, he was under again, breathing slower, face finally relaxing. Elena settled back in the chair and watched him sleep, thinking about choices and consequences and the strange ways life trapped you into situations you'd never planned for. A week ago, she'd been settling into the rhythm of ranch work, starting to believe she'd found something stable. Now she was in a town that didn't want her, caring for a man who might lose his leg, with no idea how any of this would play out. But she'd signed on for this. Not the specifics, but the general principle. She'd agreed to stay, to be part of making the ranch work. And Calder couldn't do that if he was dead or crippled by infection, so she'd do what needed doing, same as always. The next morning brought the first complication, Margaret Sutton. Elena was cleaning Calder's wounds, a process that involved hot water, carbolic solution, and Calder biting down on a leather strap to keep from screaming when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy ones, multiple people. The door opened without a knock. Margaret swept in, followed by a man Elena didn't recognize, both of them dressed like they were attending a social function rather than visiting a sick room. Margaret stopped short when she saw Elena bent over Calder with bloody bandages in her hands. Her expression went through several rapid shifts: surprise, calculation, distaste. What exactly is happening here? Margaret's voice was cold. Elena straightened, very aware of how this looked. Her in a private room with an injured man, intimate medical care, impropriety written all over it. Mr. Rourke was injured. I'm providing care as instructed by the doctor. How convenient. Margaret's gaze swept the room, taking in the single bed, the close quarters, the obvious overnight situation. And you're staying here? In this room? With him? The boarding house wouldn't take me. I wonder why. The sarcasm was sharp enough to cut. Margaret turned to Calder, whose face was gray with pain but whose eyes were alert and angry. Calder, this is completely inappropriate. You need proper medical care, not whatever this is. Elena is providing proper care, Calder said through gritted teeth. Better than anyone else has offered. She's not a nurse. She's not family. She's an employee you barely know, and now you're sharing a room with her. Margaret's voice rose. Do you have any idea what people are saying? I don't particularly care what people are saying. Well, you should. This kind of scandal could ruin both of you, her especially. Margaret looked at Elena with something between pity and contempt. You do realize what this looks like, don't you? A woman alone with a man, unchaperoned, in a bedroom? Whatever reputation you had left is gone. Elena felt heat rising in her face. Not embarrassment, but anger. My reputation is the least of my concerns right now. Then you're a fool. A woman's reputation is all she has, and you've just destroyed yours. Margaret turned back to Calder. I'm arranging for you to be moved to a proper convalescent facility, Mrs. Winters runs a respectable establishment that handles cases like this. No. Calder's voice was flat. You're not thinking clearly. I said no. I'm staying here, and Elena is staying with me. Margaret's expression hardened. Then you're both bigger fools than I thought. I came here to help, Calder, but if you're going to make decisions like this, you're on your own. She swept out, the man following silently. The door slammed. Elena stood there, hands still covered in Calder's blood, processing what had just happened. Margaret was right about one thing. Her reputation was probably destroyed. A single woman caring for an unmarried man in a private room, regardless of the circumstances, would be read only one way. I'm sorry, Calder said quietly. Elena looked at him. For what? For dragging you into this. Margaret's right. The situation is going to damage your standing in town. I didn't have much standing to begin with. Elena went back to cleaning the wounds, hands steady despite the anger still burning in her chest. And even if I did, what was I supposed to do? Leave you to manage alone? That's not how any of this works. Most people would have. Then most people are idiots. She finished with the bandages and started washing her hands. Margaret doesn't get to dictate how I live my life or what choices I make. Neither does anyone else. Calder watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're not worried about the talk? People have been talking about me since I started working at a forge in Philadelphia. They talked when I traveled west alone. They talked when I showed up at your ranch. Elena dried her hands roughly. I'm done letting other people's opinions determine my actions. That's a hard way to live. It's the only way I know. They were both quiet for a moment. Then Calder said, The ranch needs checking. The pump, the fences. I wasn't exaggerating about that. I know. If you go back, people will assume you abandoned me. If you stay, they'll assume worse. He met her eyes. Either way, you lose. Elena thought about it. He was right. There was no good option here, just varying degrees of social damage. But that wasn't new. She'd been navigating impossible choices her whole life. The doctor said you can't be moved for a week, she said, which means someone needs to stay with you. And Mrs. Chen can't run the ranch maintenance work. So what are you proposing? I go back to the ranch during the day, handle urgent repairs, check on things, come back here at night to do the medical care. Elena was already calculating travel time. It's 3 hours each way, which is rough, but doable if I leave early enough. That's 6 hours of riding daily on top of ranch work and medical care. You'll collapse. Probably, but it's better than either alternative. She looked at him steadily. Unless you have a better idea. Calder was quiet for a long moment. No, I don't. He closed his eyes. All right, do it, but if it gets to be too much, I'll handle it. Elena, I said I'll handle it. His expression shifted to something between respect and concern, but he didn't argue further, and Elena was grateful for that, because she wasn't entirely sure she could handle it either. But she'd said she would, so she would. The next 5 days were exactly as brutal as Elena had anticipated. Up before dawn, ride 3 hours to the ranch, work frantically on the most urgent repairs, ride 3 hours back to Redemption, provide medical care through the evening and night, sleep for maybe 4 hours, repeat. The ranch work was manageable but relentless. The irrigation pump had developed a leak that required replacing a gasket and reseating the pipe fitting. The north fence had a section rotted through that needed complete replacement. One of the horses had thrown a shoe. The forge chimney was clogged with a bird's nest. Mrs. Chen helped where she could, and Mr. Chen proved unexpectedly capable with basic repairs, but the specialized work fell to Elena. She worked with mechanical efficiency, her brain too tired for anything beyond immediate problem-solving. The medical care was worse, changing bandages on wounds that were trying to heal but kept reopening, monitoring for signs of infection, managing Calder's pain levels, helping him with basic needs he was too proud to ask for help with until absolutely necessary. It was intimate, uncomfortable, and utterly necessary. And through it all, the town watched and whispered. Elena felt it every time she rode through Redemption. The stares, the muttered conversations that stopped when she passed. The obvious judgment. The boarding house owner wouldn't even make eye contact. The general store clerk was coldly polite, but nothing more. People she didn't know looked at her like she was already ruined. On the 5th day, the doctor pulled her aside. You look terrible. I'm fine. You're not. You're running yourself into the ground, and it's going to catch up with you. He kept his voice low. I understand what you're trying to do, and it's admirable, but you can't sustain this pace. Just need to make it to day 7. Then we can move him back to the ranch. Elena. The doctor's use of her first name made her look up. What you're doing? Staying here, caring for him despite the talk? People are drawing conclusions. Let them. I'm trying to help you understand the situation. There are rumors circulating that you and Rourke are involved, that this arrangement is more than just employer and employee. He looked uncomfortable. Some people are saying you engineered the whole thing to trap him. Elena stared at him. Trap him? I know it's absurd, but that's what people are saying, and the longer you stay in that room with him, the more fuel you give them. So I should abandon him? Let him manage alone and probably die from infection or neglect? That's the respectable choice? The doctor sighed. I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I'm just warning you that your reputation in this town is being destroyed. And once that's gone, it's very difficult to rebuild. Then I guess I'll have to live without it. Elena turned to go. Thanks for the warning. She rode back to the ranch, fixed a broken gate hinge, checked on the cattle, rode back to Redemption. Her hands were shaking from exhaustion by the time she climbed the stairs to the livery room. Calder took one look at her and said, You can't keep doing this. We've had this conversation, and I'm having it again. You're going to collapse, and then we're both in trouble. Elena started preparing the evening bandage change. I just need 2 more days. Elena, stop. Something in his voice made her pause. She turned to look at him. Calder was propped against the wall, his injured leg elevated, looking tired but more alert than he had in days. His eyes were clear and focused directly on her. This has to stop, he said quietly. Not the care. I need that, and I'm grateful. But the rest of it. The riding back and forth, the trying to do everything, the pretending you're fine when you're clearly not. I don't have a choice. Yes, you do. The ranch can wait. Mrs. Chen and her husband are keeping things functional, and anything that can't wait a few more days isn't going to make or break us. He shifted position, wincing. What will break us is you working yourself to death trying to hold everything together alone. That's rich, coming from you. What? You've been trying to run that ranch alone for 2 years, working yourself into the ground, refusing help, pretending you can do it all. Elena's exhaustion was making her blunt. And now you're telling me not to do the exact same thing? Calder opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's different. How? Because, he stopped, clearly struggling. Because it's my ranch, my responsibility. And you're my employer, my responsibility. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? Elena sat down heavily on the stool. You took me on when I had nothing, gave me work, a place to stay, a chance to actually use my skills. You think I'm going to abandon that the first time things get difficult? They stared at each other. Outside, the sounds of the livery continued, horses moving, distant voices, the normal life of a town that had nothing to do with the strange situation unfolding in the room above. I don't know what to do here, Calder said finally, with any of this. The injury, the ranch, you wearing yourself out, Margaret spreading rumors. I can't fix it from a bed. Then stop trying to fix it. Elena rubbed her face. Just focus on healing. I'll handle the rest. That's not fair to you. Life isn't fair. I learned that a long time ago. She stood, gathering bandages. Now hold still. This is going to hurt. It did hurt, for both of them, in different ways. But they got through it, same as they'd gotten through the previous 5 days. And when Elena finally let herself sleep that night, curled in the chair because the floor was too hard and the bed was occupied, she dreamed of crossroads and empty roads and choices that all led to places she didn't want to go. But when she woke in the gray pre-dawn, Calder was still breathing steadily. The wounds showed no signs of infection, and she had work to do. So she did it. On the 7th day, Margaret returned, and this time she brought witnesses. Elena was helping Calder sit up so he could eat breakfast when she heard the footsteps on the stairs. Multiple sets, deliberate and heavy. She'd learned to recognize that sound over the past week, people coming to judge. The door opened and Margaret swept in, followed by 3 other women Elena vaguely recognized from town. All of them dressed well, all of them wearing expressions that mixed concern with barely concealed satisfaction. This has gone on long enough, Margaret announced without preamble. Calder, we're here to discuss your situation. Calder's jaw tightened. There's nothing to discuss. There's everything to discuss. Margaret gestured at Elena like she was evidence in a trial. You've been living in this room with an unmarried woman for a week. Alone, unchaperoned, in circumstances that can only be interpreted one way. The only interpretation that matters is the truth. She's providing medical care that's keeping me alive. That may be your truth, but it's not how the town sees it. One of the other women spoke up, her voice dripping false sympathy. People are talking, Mr. Rourke, and the things they're saying are damaging to both of you, but especially to Miss Voss. Elena set down the bowl of broth she'd been holding. I'm standing right here. If you have something to say about me, say it to my face. The woman blinked, clearly not expecting direct confrontation. Margaret stepped in smoothly. We're trying to help you, both of you. There's still a way to salvage this situation. I'm listening, Calder said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Margaret pulled a chair closer and sat down with the air of someone delivering important news. The doctor says you can be moved now. We've arranged for you to stay at the Henderson Ranch. They have a guest cottage, and Mrs. Henderson has offered to oversee your recovery. It's respectable, properly supervised, and it removes you from this compromising situation. No. Calder, be reasonable. I'm going back to my own ranch. Today, if the doctor clears it. That's impossible. You can't manage on your own, and you can't expect Miss Voss to continue this arrangement. It's already destroyed her reputation. My reputation isn't your concern, Elena said flatly. Margaret turned to her with an expression that might have passed for kindness if her eyes weren't so cold. My dear, you don't understand what you've done. No respectable family will hire you now. No decent man will court you. You've made yourself unmarriageable and unemployable in one stroke. I have employment at the Broken R. For now, But what happens when Calder decides he can't keep defending these choices? What happens when the scandal becomes too much even for him? Margaret leaned forward. You've trapped yourself in an impossible situation, unless... She paused, and Elena could see the calculation happening. This was what Margaret had really come to say. Unless what? Calder asked, voice dangerous. Unless you marry her. The words landed like a physical blow. Elena actually took a step back. Calder went completely still. That's the only way to make this respectable, Margaret continued, warming to her subject. If you announce an engagement, everything that's happened can be reframed as a courtship. The time alone together becomes less scandalous. People will still talk, but they'll accept it eventually. That's insane, Elena said. It's practical, and it solves both your problems. Margaret looked between them. Calder, you need someone to help run the ranch. Miss Voss is already doing that. The marriage would legitimize the arrangement and stop the gossip. Miss Voss, you need security and protection from scandal. Marriage provides both. It's a perfectly reasonable solution. It's not a solution, it's a trap, Calder said. His face had gone pale. You want me to marry someone to avoid gossip? That's your advice? I want you to face reality. You're injured, your ranch is failing, and you've created a scandal that won't disappear on its own. Margaret's voice hardened. If you don't marry her, she's ruined, and you're the one who ruined her by putting her in this position. Elena felt something hot and sharp in her chest. Nobody ruined me. I made my own choices. Choices have consequences, Miss Voss. And the consequence of your choice to stay here is that decent society won't accept you anymore, unless you become Mrs. Rourke. Margaret stood. Think about it, both of you, because right now, marriage is the only path forward that doesn't end in disaster for at least one of you. She left, her entourage following. The silence they left behind was thick and uncomfortable. Elena moved to the window, looking out at the street below. People were going about their normal business, buying supplies, talking, living lives that weren't defined by impossible choices and social condemnation. She's not entirely wrong, Calder said quietly. Elena turned. About which part? About the damage to your reputation. I didn't think it would get this bad, but Margaret's right. No respectable household will hire you now. Not after this. He looked miserable. I did this to you by asking you to stay, by creating this situation. Stop. Elena's voice was sharp. You didn't create anything. I chose to come to redemption. I chose to stay and help. I chose to keep coming back even when the gossip started. Those were my choices. Choices you made because I was injured and needed help. Choices I made because that's who I am. I don't abandon people when things get difficult. She crossed her arms. But I'm not marrying you to make Margaret Sutton happy or to salvage a reputation I never had in the first place. Calder nodded slowly. Good, because I wasn't asking. They looked at each other for a long moment. The absurdity of it. Two people who barely knew each other, having to discuss marriage as a solution to a crisis neither of them had wanted, would have been funny if it wasn't so damn frustrating. The doctor's coming this afternoon to check the leg, Calder said, shifting to safer ground. If he clears me to travel, we leave tomorrow morning. Early. Agreed. And when we get back to the ranch, we figure out how to actually move forward. Not with Margaret's suggestions, but with something that works for both of us. Elena wanted to ask what that meant, but she was too tired and too angry to have that conversation. So she just nodded and went back to changing his bandages. The doctor arrived at 2 and spent 20 minutes examining Calder's leg, checking range of motion, testing for signs of infection. Finally, he stepped back with a cautious nod. It's healing better than I expected. You've been lucky. No infection, bones are setting properly. He looked at Elena. Your care has been excellent. Better than some trained nurses I've seen. So he can travel? Elena asked. Slowly and carefully. No riding. He'll need to be in a wagon, lying down, with the leg immobilized, and someone will need to monitor him constantly for the next few weeks. I can do that. The doctor hesitated. Miss Voss, about the situation here, don't. Elena's voice was flat. Whatever you're about to say, don't. We're leaving tomorrow, and what people think about it is their problem, not mine. The doctor looked like he wanted to argue, then just sighed. All right, I'll check on him in 2 weeks. If you notice any fever, increased pain, or signs of infection before then, Come find me immediately. He left instructions for ongoing care and departed. Elena sat down heavily, feeling the weight of the past week finally catching up. Tomorrow they'd go back to the ranch and then… what? The situation Margaret had described wasn't wrong. Elena's reputation, such as it was thoroughly destroyed. Her options outside the broken R had just shrunk to approximately zero. But she'd been at zero before. She could live there. That evening, as she was preparing Calder's dinner, he said, "I need to tell you something." Elena looked up. His expression was serious in a way that made her nervous. "The ranch is in debt," he said bluntly. "Has been for 2 years since my father died. I've been making payments, keeping things afloat, but it's not sustainable. Margaret knows this. That's part of why she's been pushing me to sell." "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that one bad season could finish us. One serious equipment failure, one cattle disease, one drought. Anything that costs significant money would probably be the end." He met her eyes. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're signing on for. The ranch might fail, and if it does, you'll be out of work with a destroyed reputation and nowhere to go." Elena processed this. It was worse than she'd thought, but not entirely surprising. She'd seen the deferred maintenance, the stretched resources, the one-person operation trying to do 3 people's work. "Why are you telling me now?" she asked. "Because Margaret's right about one thing. You're trapped. Not by marriage pressure, but by circumstances. You can't easily get other work, and the ranch might not survive anyway." He looked away. "I wanted you to know that before we go back, so you can make decisions with actual information instead of assumptions." It was honest to the point of brutal. Elena appreciated that, even as it made her stomach clench. "So what are you proposing?" she asked. "Nothing. I'm just giving you the facts." He shifted uncomfortably. "If you want to leave, find somewhere else before the scandal makes that impossible. I'll understand. I'll give you references, pay for travel, whatever you need. And if I stay? Then we figure out how to make the ranch work, together, not as some forced marriage arrangement, but as actual partners trying to build something that can survive." He paused. "But I need you to understand. That might not be possible. We might fail anyway." Elena thought about crossroads and empty roads and the endless series of failures that had led her to that splintered bench where Calder's wagon had broken down. She thought about the forge, the repairs, the satisfaction of fixing things that were broken. She thought about Mrs. Chen's words. "Sometimes people just need to show up and do the work, day after day." "I'll stay," she said. Calder looked at her like he was trying to read her mind. "Why?" "Because walking away doesn't guarantee success either. At least here I know what I'm fighting for." She set down the bowl. "And because you're right, we work well together. We might actually have a chance if we stop trying to do everything alone." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or hope. Hard to tell with Calder. "All right then," he said. "We'll figure it out." They left for the ranch at dawn before most of the town was awake to watch. The livery owner had helped Elena rig a makeshift bed in the wagon, padding it with blankets to cushion Calder's injured leg. The trip took 5 hours instead of the usual 3, with Elena stopping frequently to check on him and adjust his position. By the time they reached the broken R, Calder was gray with pain despite the laudanum, and Elena was exhausted from the careful driving and constant vigilance. Mrs. Chen came running out when she heard the wagon, took one look at Calder, and immediately started barking orders in Cantonese to her husband. Together they got Calder into the main house. Elena had insisted, over his protests, that he couldn't manage the stairs to the bunkhouse with his leg. They set him up in what had apparently been his father's room, with windows overlooking the ranch and enough space for the medical supplies Elena had brought from town. "You should rest, Mrs. Chen told Elena after they'd settled Calder. "You look terrible. I need to check on the ranch first, see what needs immediate attention. Mr. Chen and I have been managing. Everything critical is handled." Mrs. Chen's expression was stern. "You rest now. Later you can work yourself to death." Elena was too tired to argue. She went to the bunkhouse, collapsed on her bed fully clothed, and slept for 14 hours straight. When she woke, the sun was setting again. She felt disoriented and vaguely guilty for losing an entire day, but her body had desperately needed it. She washed her face, changed clothes, and went to check on Calder. He was awake, propped up on pillows, looking out the window at the land. He turned when she entered. You look better, he said. So do you. It was true. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by something closer to his normal color. How's the pain? Manageable? He gestured at the chair beside the bed. Sit. We need to talk. Elena sat, bracing herself. Whatever this was, it felt important. I've been thinking about what you said. About being partners. Calder's voice was careful. If we're going to do this, really do this, not just muddle through, we need to be honest about what that means. All right. The ranch needs significant investment to become profitable again. New equipment, more cattle, repairs I've been putting off for years. I don't have the capital for that. He paused. But I do have land. Good land, water rights, buildings, assets that have value even if they're not currently generating profit. Elena waited, not sure where this was going. If you're willing to invest your labor, your skills, your time, your commitment to making this work, then I'm willing to give you equity in the ranch. Not wages. Ownership. He met her eyes. Real partnership, not just employment. Elena stared at him. You're serious? Completely. You've already proven you can do the work. You've shown up when most people would have left. And you're right, we work well together. But I can't ask you to keep gambling on something where you have no stake. He shifted position, wincing. So I'm offering you one. 25% ownership in the Broken R, with the option to increase that to full partnership if we make it through the next 2 years. That's... Elena couldn't find words. That's insane. You barely know me. I know you fixed my wagon when you could have walked away. I know you stayed through a medical crisis that destroyed your reputation. I know you're the best metalworker I've seen, and you don't give up on things just because they're hard. He paused. I know enough. What if I take the equity and leave anyway? What if I'm terrible at this and the ranch fails because of me? Then we fail together, and at least I tried something different instead of just slowly drowning alone. Calder's expression was completely serious. I'm not offering this because I'm desperate, though I am. I'm offering it because it's fair. You're doing the work of a partner already. You should have the legal standing to match. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch. Her ranch, potentially. Land she'd have a stake in, a future she'd be building instead of just surviving through. It was everything she'd wanted and nothing she'd expected. It was also terrifying. What about Margaret? She asked. What about the rumors and the scandal and all of it? What about them? Calder's voice was matter-of-fact. Let people think what they want. We'll know the truth, and that's what matters. That's not how the world works. Then maybe the world can go to hell. He said it with such conviction that Elena almost smiled. I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people think is proper. My father did that, tried to build a dynasty and impress the right people. It nearly destroyed us. I'd rather build something real with someone who actually gives a damn about making it work. Elena turned back to face him. This isn't a marriage proposal, right? Because Margaret put that idea in my head, and I need to be clear, it's not a marriage proposal. It's a business partnership with legal documentation. Calder actually smiled, tired but genuine. Though I suppose to some people that's basically the same thing. Those people are idiots. Agreed. They looked at each other, and Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not quite trust, they weren't there yet, but something like mutual recognition. Two people who'd both been abandoned and judged, and told they were doing things wrong, deciding to do it wrong together. I'll need to see the actual terms, Elena said. Legal documentation, clear percentages, what happens if one of us wants out. I'll have it drawn up. Fair terms, reviewed by a lawyer, everything in writing. And I want full access to the books. If I'm a partner, I need to know exactly how bad the debt is and what we're working with. Done. An equal say in major decisions, not me deferring to you because you've been here longer. Agreed. Elena took a breath. This was either the best decision she'd ever made or the worst, and she wouldn't know which for years. But standing at crossroads waiting for perfect information had never gotten her anywhere. Sometimes you just had to pick a road and commit. All right, she said. I'm in. Calder extended his hand. Elena shook it, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the strength that came from actual work instead of posturing. Partners, he said. Partners. It should have felt momentous, but mostly it just felt like the logical next step. They had work to do, a ranch to save, and a whole town that thought they were scandalous idiots. Might as well prove them wrong together. The next morning, Calder sent Elena into town with a list and money for a lawyer. She rode in expecting the usual cold shoulders and whispers, and got them in abundance. But she also got something new, a kind of grim satisfaction. Let them judge. She was building something real while they gossiped about it. The lawyer Calder had recommended, a sharp-eyed woman named Ruth Alvarez, who worked out of a small office above the general store, listened to Elena's explanation without visible judgment. Partnership agreement with equity stake, Ruth said, making notes. And you want this documented properly so it holds up if challenged. Exactly. Smart. Most people in your situation would just shake hands and hope for the best. Ruth looked up. I'll draw up the papers, but you should know, this is going to make the gossip worse before it gets better. People will assume you've trapped him or seduced him or both. Let them assume. You're tougher than you look. Ruth smiled slightly. I like that. All right, give me 3 days. I'll bring the papers out to the ranch for signing. Elena paid the retainer and left, walking through town with her head up despite the stares. She had a purpose now, a stake in something, a path that led somewhere other than another crossroads. When she got back to the ranch, Calder was sitting up in bed working through ledgers, against doctor's orders, but Elena had learned not to waste energy on arguments she wouldn't win. Lawyers drafting the papers, she said. 3 days. Good. He gestured at the book spread across the bed. Come here. You wanted to see the finances. Time to learn just how bad it really is. Elena sat down and started reading. The numbers were worse than she'd feared. Debt stacked on debt, interest eating into thin profits, operating margins that left no room for error. But there was also potential, good land, water rights that were increasingly valuable, a location that could support more cattle if they had the capital to invest. We can make this work, she said slowly. But it'll take at least 2 years of very careful management and probably some luck. That's my assessment, too. Calder pointed at a column of numbers. If we can make it through this year's cattle sale without any major disasters, we'll have enough to reinvest in equipment. That'll let us increase productivity enough to start paying down the principal debt instead of just the interest. And if we have a major disaster, then we're finished. It was blunt but honest. Elena appreciated that more than reassurance. They spent the next 2 hours going through every line of the books, with Calder explaining the history and Elena asking questions. By the end, she had a clear picture of exactly what they were up against. It was terrifying. It was also, strangely, exhilarating. A puzzle to solve, a challenge to meet, something that required all her skills and determination and refusal to give up. I have an idea, Elena said. About the forge. I'm listening. We've been thinking about it as ranch maintenance, fixing our own equipment to save money, but there's no other forge within 50 miles. If I can get it fully operational, we could take on outside work. Repairs for other ranches, custom metalwork, whatever people need. Calder considered this. That would bring in cash income separate from the cattle operation. Exactly. Diversify the revenue stream. And it's work I can do without pulling resources from ranch operations. You'd be working yourself to death again. I'd be building equity in something I own. That's different. Elena met his eyes. And you'd be doing the same thing once your leg heals. We're both going to work ourselves to the bone. Might as well be strategic about it. Calder actually laughed. A real laugh, not just amusement. Fair point. All right, let's do it. Get the forge operational, take on outside work, see if we can turn this around. Together. Together. 3 days later, Ruth Alvarez arrived with the partnership papers. She spread them across the kitchen table and walked them through every clause, every contingency, every protection built into the agreement. It was thorough to the point of exhausting, but Elena read every word twice. The terms were fair, more than fair. 25% ownership immediately, with clear paths to increasing her stake based on time served and ranch profitability. Equal say in major decisions. Protection for both parties if one wanted to exit. It was professional, binding, and gave Elena more security than she'd ever had in her life. Any questions? Ruth asked. Elena looked at Calder, who was propped in a chair despite the pain it caused him, because he'd insisted on being present for this. He looked back at her steadily. No questions, Elena said. They signed. Ruth witnessed and notarized. Just like that, Elena Voss became a legal owner of the Broken R. Ruth packed up her papers and stood to leave. Congratulations. And good luck. You're going to need it. After she left, Elena and Calder sat in silence for a long moment. The papers sat on the table between them, proof of something that shouldn't exist according to every social convention Elena had ever encountered. A woman with no family, no connections, no money, now owned part of a ranch. A man who'd been told to sell and move on had instead doubled down with a partner most people considered scandalous. "We're either brilliant or insane," Elena said. "Probably both." Calder reached across the table and tapped the papers. "But at least we're both together." Elena smiled despite herself. "Yeah, at least there's that." Outside, the ranch waited, fences needing mending, equipment needing maintenance, a forge needing restoration, and a future that was terrifying and uncertain, and finally, maybe, hers. She could work with that. The partnership papers had been filed for 3 weeks when Margaret Sutton made her final move. Elena was in the forge, working on a custom gate hinge for the Henderson Ranch. Ironic, given that they were Margaret's allies, but business was business, and their money spent the same as anyone else's. She'd gotten the forge fully operational 2 weeks prior, and word had spread faster than she'd expected. Turns out a skilled metalworker willing to do custom work was valuable enough that people were willing to overlook scandal. She heard the wagon before she saw it. Multiple horses, moving with purpose. Elena set down her hammer and stepped outside, squinting in the afternoon sun. Margaret's carriage, followed by a second wagon driven by a man in a suit. They pulled up to the main house where Calder was working through paperwork on the porch. He could walk now, slowly and with a cane, but he spent most days managing the business side while Elena handled the physical work. Elena wiped her hands and walked over, arriving just as Margaret climbed down from her carriage. The suited man emerged from the other wagon carrying a leather case. "Margaret," Calder said, not bothering to stand, "what brings you out here?" "Business, Calder, the kind that can't wait." Margaret gestured at the man. "This is James Whitmore, attorney from Denver. He's here representing the consolidated creditors of the Broken R." Elena felt her stomach drop. Calder's expression went carefully blank. "My creditors know how to reach me," he said. "They didn't need to send someone from Denver. They did when I bought up all your outstanding debts." Margaret's smile was sharp. "Every note, every loan, every line of credit you've been juggling for the past 2 years. I now hold all of it, and I'm calling it due." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop. Whitmore opened his case and pulled out documents. "Mr. Rourke, you currently owe a total of $14,362 across various creditors. Mrs. Sutton has consolidated these debts and is demanding full payment within 30 days, as is her legal right under the terms of the original loan agreements." Calder didn't move, but Elena could see the muscles in his jaw working. "That's not possible, and you know it." "I know you can't pay," Margaret agreed, "which is why I'm prepared to make you an offer. Sell me the Broken R for $8,000, enough to clear the debt and give you a small amount to start fresh elsewhere. It's generous, considering the property's current state." "It's robbery." Elena's voice came out harder than she intended. "The land alone is worth twice that, and you know it." Margaret turned to her with barely concealed contempt. "And who are you to make that assessment, Miss Voss? Oh, wait, I forgot. You're a partner now. How convenient." She looked back at Calder. "Did you really think making her an owner would solve your problems? All you've done is drag someone else down with you." "The partnership is legal and binding," Calder said. "I'm sure it is. I'm also sure Miss Voss's 25% of nothing is still nothing." Margaret's expression hardened. "You have 30 days, Calder. Pay the full amount or sell to me. Those are your options." She climbed back into her carriage. Whitmore handed Calder the legal documents and followed her. They drove away, leaving dust and silence in their wake. Elena and Calder stared at the papers. $14,000. They had maybe $800 in cash reserves, and that was supposed to last them through the next cattle sale 3 months away. "She planned this," Calder said quietly. "Probably been buying up the debts for months, waiting for the right moment." "Can she actually do this? Force payment like that?" "If the loan terms allow it, yes. and knowing Margaret, she made sure they did before she bought them. He flipped through the pages, his face getting progressively grimmer. She's got us. We can't pay. We can't get new financing with debts this size, and we can't generate $14,000 in 30 days. Elena's mind was racing through possibilities, all of them dead ends. The forge work was bringing in money, but not that kind of money. The cattle weren't ready for sale. They had no assets they could liquidate quickly enough. There has to be something, she said. There isn't. Calder set down the papers with a sound that was almost a laugh. She won. Finally got what she wanted. The land, the water rights, everything. And she did it legally, so there's no fighting it. I'm not giving up. Elena, I said I'm not giving up. She grabbed the papers, started reading through them properly. There has to be a loophole, something we can use. Lawyers leave gaps. They always do. She spent the rest of the day going through every word of the debt consolidation documents. Calder tried to help, but eventually gave up and went to check on the cattle, moving slowly and looking 20 years older than he had that morning. Mrs. Chen brought Elena dinner in the house, setting it down with unusual gentleness. This is bad? Very bad. What will you do? Elena looked up from the papers, her eyes burning from hours of reading dense legal text. I don't know yet, but I'll figure something out. Mrs. Chen nodded, like she believed that despite all evidence to the contrary, and left Elena alone with documents that spelled out their defeat in meticulous legal language. By midnight, Elena had found exactly nothing useful. Every loan was airtight, every term clearly stated. Margaret had been thorough. The only way out was $14,000 they didn't have, or selling for far less than the property was worth. Elena pushed back from the table and walked outside. The ranch was quiet, just stars and the distant sound of cattle. She'd been a legal owner for less than a month. She'd actually started to believe they could make this work. She should have known better. The next morning, Elena rode into redemption with a plan that was either desperate or inspired. She wasn't sure which. She went straight to Ruth Alvarez's office and laid out the situation. Ruth listened, made notes, and shook her head. I'll be honest with you. This is tight. Margaret structured this carefully. You're not going to find a technical loophole. So we're finished. I didn't say that. Ruth leaned back in her chair. Legal loopholes aren't the only kind. Sometimes you have to get creative. I'm listening? The debts are real and they're due, but there's nothing in these documents that says who can pay them. Ruth tapped the papers. If someone else, say a new investor, wanted to pay off the consolidated debt that would satisfy the legal requirement, Margaret would have to accept payment from any legitimate source. We don't have investors. Not yet, but you have assets Margaret wants badly enough to orchestrate this entire scheme. That suggests the property has value beyond what's on paper. Ruth pulled out a fresh sheet and started sketching. What if you offered partnership stakes to multiple investors? Not selling the ranch, but bringing in capital partners who'd benefit from the water rights and land access. Elena felt something spark in her chest. The water rights. Exactly. You've got spring-fed water that's increasingly valuable as the region gets more settled. Other ranchers would pay for access to that, and for partnership stakes that give them long-term security. But we'd be diluting ownership. Calder and I would lose majority control. Maybe. Or maybe you structure it so operational control stays with you and Calder, while investors get profit shares and water access. It depends how you frame it. Ruth started writing faster. This would require moving very fast. You've only got 30 days, and finding investors takes time. But it's possible. Elena's mind was already racing ahead. The Hendersons, despite being Margaret's friends, had been complaining about water access. The Morales Ranch to the east had expressed interest in expanding. The Chinese farming collective that Mr. Chen had connections with was looking for stable water sources. How fast can you draft partnership proposals? Elena asked. If you can identify potential investors today, I can have proposals ready by tomorrow afternoon. Ruth looked at her seriously. This is risky. You're gambling that you can find enough investors fast enough and that they'll actually commit. If it fails, you'll have wasted time and money you don't have. And if we don't try, we definitely lose. Elena stood. Draft the proposals. I'll find the investors. She rode back to the ranch at speed, mind cataloging every conversation she'd had over the past months. Every rancher who'd complained about water, every business owner who'd mentioned expansion, every person who might see value in what the Broken R had to offer. Calder was in the forge when she found him, attempting to work despite his leg and mostly just making a mess of it. He looked up when Elena entered, saw her expression, and set down the hammer. "You found something." "Maybe." Elena explained Ruth's idea rapidly, watching his face shift from skepticism to cautious interest. "It's a gamble, but it's the only play we have. You're talking about bringing in multiple partners. That changes everything about how we run this place. It keeps us from losing it entirely." Elena met his eyes. "And it's honest. We're not selling out to Margaret at below value. We're building something bigger with people who actually want to see it succeed." Calder was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, let's do it. Who are you thinking?" They spent the next 3 hours making a list and strategy. The Hendersons for water rights, the Morales family for grazing access, the Redemption mercantile owner who'd mentioned wanting to invest in local operations, Mr. Chen's farming collective, even the wheelwright who'd fixed Calder's wagon that first day. He had capital and had been looking for investment opportunities. Elena started riding the next morning. First stop, the Henderson Ranch. Thomas Henderson met her at the gate, his expression guarded. "Miss Voss, I heard about Margaret's move. That's rough business." "It is. Which is why I'm here with a proposal." Elena handed him the document Ruth had prepared. "Water rights and grazing access in exchange for investment capital. You've been complaining about water access for years. This solves that problem." Henderson read slowly, his weathered face creasing with concentration. "This is partnership, not purchase." "Correct. You'd have stake in the ranch's success, ongoing water access, and grazing rights during dry seasons. We maintain operational control. You get security for your water needs. And if the ranch fails anyway, then you still have the water rights. Ruth structured it so those are protected even if we go under." Elena kept her voice level. "But we're not planning to go under. We're planning to build something that works for everyone involved." Henderson looked at her for a long moment. "Margaret's going to be furious." "Probably." "Good." He smiled slightly. "I never liked her buying up all those debts just to force you out. That's not how business should work." He tapped the document. "Let me talk to my wife and my foreman. I'll have an answer by tomorrow evening." Elena rode to the Morales Ranch next, then into town to meet with the mercantile owner. Same pitch, tailored to each person's specific needs and interests. By sunset, she was exhausted and hoarse from talking, but she had 3 solid maybes and 2 definite interested parties. The next 2 weeks were a blur of negotiations, document revisions, and pitched conversations with potential investors. Ruth worked overtime drafting and redrafting agreements. Calder handled the technical details, surveying property lines, calculating water flow rates, documenting assets. Elena rode between ranches and businesses, making the case over and over. Some people said no outright. The boarding house owner literally slammed the door in her face. 2 ranchers told her they wouldn't invest in anything involving that kind of arrangement, making it clear they meant her partnership with Calder. But others listened, really listened, and some of them said yes. The Hendersons committed first, $5,000 for water rights and a 5% stake. The Morales family followed with $3,000 for grazing access and 3%. The mercantile owner came in at $2,000 for 2%, seeing it as community investment. Mr. Chen's farming collective, after intense discussion in Cantonese that Elena couldn't follow, committed $3,000 for water access. The wheelwright surprised everyone by offering $2,000 for a stake, saying he believed in people who fix things instead of running from them. By day 23, they had $15,000 committed, enough to pay Margaret's debt with money left over for operations. Ruth assembled all the final paperwork in her office, while Elena, Calder, and all the investors gathered for the signing. It took 3 hours to get through all the documents, with Ruth explaining every clause to ensure everyone understood what they were committing to. When the last signature was dry, Ruth looked up with a tired smile. "Congratulations. You're now a multi-partner cooperative ranch with protected water rights and diversified investment. Also, you're completely insane." Thomas Henderson laughed. "Probably. But it beats watching Margaret Sutton carve up the valley piece by piece." They delivered the payment to Margaret the next morning. Elena insisted on being there, even though Calder said it wasn't necessary. Margaret was in her drawing room when they arrived, looking supremely confident right up until Whitmore opened the envelope and his expression changed. "This is," he started. "Full payment of the consolidated debt as requested," Calder said. "Certified banknotes, verified and notarized. I believe that satisfies the legal requirement." Margaret snatched the papers, reading rapidly. Elena watched her face shift from confusion to understanding to barely controlled rage. "You brought in investors. We built a partnership cooperative, legal, binding, and properly structured." Elena kept her voice neutral. "The debt is paid. We'll take the discharge papers now." You can't." Margaret looked like she was trying to find words for something she hadn't anticipated. "You've ruined the property value by fragmenting ownership. We've increased the property value by bringing in capital and expertise," Calder corrected, "and we've ensured the ranch survives, which was always the goal. You'll never be able to buy them out. You've trapped yourself with multiple partners who will all want say in operations." "That's the point," Elena said. "We're not trying to build an empire. We're trying to build something sustainable." Margaret stared at them, and for the first time Elena saw something other than calculating superiority in her expression. She looked genuinely thrown, maybe even impressed despite herself. "Whitmore, give them the discharge papers," Margaret said finally. "They've satisfied the debt." The lawyer did, though he looked deeply unhappy about it. Calder folded them carefully and tucked them into his jacket. "Thank you for the motivation," he said to Margaret. "We might not have gotten this organized without you forcing the issue." They left before she could respond. Once outside, Elena let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like weeks. "That was satisfying," she said. "More than it should be," Calder agreed. He was smiling, though, really smiling, in a way Elena hadn't seen since before the accident. "We actually did it. We had help." "We did. And now we get to figure out how to make it work long term." He looked at the discharge papers. "This is going to be complicated. Multiple partners, different interests, constant negotiation." "Sounds terrible," Elena said. "When do we start?" The first partnership meeting happened a week later in the main house, which Mrs. Chen had cleaned within an inch of its life for the occasion. All the investors gathered around the large kitchen table while Ruth Alvarez moderated and took notes. "First order of business," she said, "is establishing how decisions get made. The partnership agreement gives operational control to Calder and Elena, but major financial decisions require majority investor approval. We need to clarify where that line is." What followed was 3 hours of sometimes heated discussion about water allocation schedules, grazing rotation, profit distribution, and maintenance responsibilities. The Hendersons wanted priority water access. The Morales family pushed for longer grazing windows. Mr. Chen's collective had specific needs around irrigation timing. Elena had thought the hard part was getting the investment. She was learning that the harder part was making it actually work. But something unexpected happened during that meeting. When disagreements arose, people negotiated instead of demanding. When someone made a good point, others acknowledged it. And when Calder or Elena explained why something wasn't feasible, people listened and adjusted their expectations. It wasn't smooth. Thomas Henderson and Morales had a sharp exchange about fence line access that got tense. The mercantile owners' questions about profit timelines were pointed. But everyone stayed, worked through it, and eventually came to agreements that weren't perfect but were acceptable. "I think that's all we can handle for today," Ruth said finally. "Next meeting in 3 months unless something urgent comes up. Calder and Elena will send quarterly reports on operations and finances." People filed out slowly, some stopping to examine the ranch, others talking in small groups. Elena felt exhausted and wired at the same time. The wheelwright paused on his way out. "You know what this reminds me of? When I started my business. A lot of people told me I was stupid, that I'd fail, that I should just work for someone else." He smiled. "But I knew what I was doing, same as you two. Trust that." After everyone left, Elena and Calder sat on the porch in the cooling evening air. The ranch spread out before them. Fences they'd repaired, equipment they'd maintained, land they now shared with 6 other stakeholders. "That could have gone worse," Calder said. "That could have gone better." "True." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you." Elena looked at him. For what? For not giving up, for finding a solution when I couldn't see one, for caring enough about this place to fight for it. He met her eyes. I couldn't have done this alone. You wouldn't have had to if I hadn't been here creating scandal and forcing the issue. Margaret would have found another way to corner me eventually. You didn't create this situation. You gave us a way to survive it. He paused. We make a good team. We do. Elena felt something warm in her chest. Not quite contentment. They still had too much work ahead for that. But maybe satisfaction. Maybe peace. Strange how things work out. Strange is one word for it. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The cattle were settling for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The forge chimney was still warm from Elena's afternoon work. 6 months ago, Elena had been sitting at a crossroads with $23 and no future. Now she was a legal partner in a functioning ranch, with a forge that was generating income and a network of investors who'd bet on her and Calder making it work. It wasn't what she'd imagined when her father had first taught her to shape metal. It wasn't what she'd planned when Marcus had abandoned her at that dusty intersection. It wasn't even what she'd expected when Calder first offered her work. But it was hers. Really, legally, undeniably hers. What are you thinking? Calder asked. Elena considered how to answer that, then decided on the truth. I'm thinking that for the first time in my life, I'm not wondering when I'll have to leave. I'm not planning the next move or calculating how long I can make things last. She looked at the ranch, their ranch. I'm thinking about what to build next, and that's new. Calder nodded slowly. Yeah, I know that feeling. He stood, testing his weight on the injured leg. It held, though he still favored it. Come on, Mrs. Chen made dinner, and if we're late, she'll give us hell. They walked inside together, and Elena realized something else that was new. She wasn't alone. Not in the way she'd been alone at the crossroads, or in Sacramento, or in Philadelphia after her father died. She had partners, plural, complicated, sometimes frustrating, but real. Dinner was beef stew and fresh bread, with Mr. and Mrs. Chen joining them at the table like they'd started doing since the partnership was formalized. They talked about the next day's work, the upcoming cattle sale, the forge orders Elena had lined up. Normal conversation about normal things, except nothing about it was normal by conventional standards. A woman blacksmith, a struggling rancher, a Chinese couple who'd been relegated to servant status, a cooperative partnership that gave workers equity. Everything about their arrangement violated someone's idea of how things should be, and it was working anyway. After dinner, Elena walked out to the forge one more time. She didn't need to work. She was too tired for metal work that required precision. But she wanted to stand in the space, feel the residual heat from the day's fire, remind herself that this was real. She heard footsteps and turned to see Calder in the doorway. Thought I'd find you here, he said. Just checking on things. Right. He came inside, running his hand along the workbench. You've really brought this place back to life. My grandfather would have been pleased. Your grandfather and I probably would have gotten along. He sounds like he understood priorities. Elena touched the anvil, feeling the cool iron. Think we'll actually pull this off? Long term? Honestly? I don't know. We've solved the immediate crisis, but there'll be others. Drought, disease, equipment failures, partners who want out, new problems we can't even predict yet. Calder leaned against the doorframe. But I know we've got a better shot now than we did 6 months ago, and we've proven we can handle crisis when it comes. That's not exactly reassuring. It's honest, which I figure you prefer. Elena smiled despite herself. Yeah, I do. They stood in the quiet forge, two people who'd found each other by accident and built something by design. Outside, the ranch settled into night. The work would start again tomorrow. It always did. But for now, in this moment, they could just exist in the space they'd created. We should probably sleep, Calder said. Tomorrow's going to be long. Tomorrow's always long. True. He pushed off the doorframe. But at least it's our long now. Elena followed him out, closing the forge door behind her. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like forge sparks frozen in place. She could see the outline of the ranch buildings, the fence lines they'd repaired together, the land they'd fought to keep. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. There would always be people like Margaret who thought they were doing it wrong, living incorrectly, making scandalous choices. There would be setbacks and failures and moments of doubt, but it was theirs. Built not through rescue or luck, but through work and partnership and the stubborn refusal to accept that the only options were the ones other people laid out. Elena walked to the bunkhouse, feeling the familiar ache of a day's hard work in her shoulders and hands. Tomorrow she'd wake up before dawn and start again. Fix what needed fixing, build what needed building, deal with whatever crisis emerged. But tonight, she'd sleep in a place she owned, on a ranch that wouldn't be sold out from under her, with partners who'd proven they'd work through problems instead of abandoning them. She'd spent years at crossroads, trying to figure out which road led somewhere worth going. Turned out the answer wasn't a road at all. It was building something right where you stood, with whatever materials you had available and whoever was willing to work alongside you. The math was simple. One broken wagon, one desperate woman, one struggling ranch. Add in impossible odds, social condemnation, debt consolidation, and a scheme designed to destroy them. Multiply by stubbornness, skill, and partnerships built on actual respect instead of convention. The solution wasn't elegant, but it held. And sometimes, holding was enough.